The bison is one of North America's most recognizable animals. Noted for their immense power and size, they can be found roaming the plains with a total population of 500,000 individuals. While sounded like a decent number, this is dwarfed by their numbers in the past. Just over 200 years ago, bison numbers varied in the range of 20 million to upwards of 100 million, making it the most numerous large land mammal on Earth. So what happened that caused such a population crash? Well, the story of the near extinction of the bison is a reflection of our past and the reckless disregard for nature and our usage of it. So how exactly did we get in this situation? Well, let's find out. To understand this near extinction, we first have to understand humans' relationship with the American bison, and that goes all the way back to the end of the Pleistocene. Around 195 to 135,000 years ago, the bison made its way to North America. This species was the very successful steppe bison. In fact, I've made a video about a specimen of this species that was uncovered in Alaska, so go check it out if you're interested. Back to the point, however, this migration of the steppe bison from Asia into North America is supported by fossil evidence, with the oldest fossils of bison found in the Americas being attributed to this species. It is believed to have given rise not only to the modern-day American bison, but also extinct species such as Bison antiquus and the enormous Bison latifrons. The former of these appearing to be very successful, spreading across the continent, causing problems for other large herbivores such as mammoths and horses that now had to compete with the quickly spreading bison. After this, a second migration occurred much later on, around 40 to 20,000 years ago. This second migration was from the likely ancestors of the modern species, which began slowly replacing the slightly larger ones through outcompeting them and having a little help from another new arrival: humans. Whilst it is heavily debated what time humans arrived in America, with estimates ranging between 11 to 20,000 years ago, what is known is that, like the bison, they originated from a population in Asia that migrated across Beringia. For an idea of what these people look like, look no further than the Chukchi people of Siberia, the closest relatives of Native Americans found outside of North America. Whenever they arrived, it was clear that even back then, the bison was an essential food source for these people. Cultures such as the Clovis and Folsom were hunting and relying on the ancient Bison antiquus for food, and when this species went extinct, possibly due to this hunting, it left the niche wide open for the new American bison to fill. The Native Americans also appear to have not only allowed the bison to fill the niche, but also facilitated its spread. These early people would often use strategic wildfires in order to clear trees and forests, which directly led to the spread of grasslands and the formation of the famous Great Plains habitat that the American bison would call home. So, with the two parties now in North America, it didn't take long for hunting of bison by people to become common. As mentioned, even before the spread of the American bison, Bison antiquus was a favoured food of the native populations, and to get this food source, they would often employ certain hunting techniques. One site in Oklahoma shows an early strategy that these hunters would use to take down these enormous beasts. At a site named Bluff, the remains of 22 Bison antiquus were uncovered, and dated to around the time of the Clovis culture. This site was said to represent a dried up stream, with high walls surrounding it. Researchers suggested that the humans would have chased a group of bison into the riverbed, trapping them and proceeding to kill all the individuals within. Whilst it may seem unnecessary to slaughter so many animals at once, this practice would only become more common and larger once the American bison arrived. This method of herding bison gave rise to strategies such as the bison pound and jumps. The first, in my opinion, is probably the most, how to put this, normal way of hunting bison. This involved the construction of a paddock-like structure out of poles of wood laid out in an oval shape, which were filled with other debris in between to enclose the animals. Leading to the pound, there was a funnel which started wide at its mouth before narrowing as it got closer to the entrance of the pound. Just before this, however, the funnel quickly turned at a sharp angle, obscuring the pound from the animal's sight and probably confusing them once they entered. From here, the bison were easy pickings, being speared or shot at with arrows by people circling the perimeter. They'd have to kill the animals quick, however, as I can't imagine wood would be an effective material at holding a rampaging 1,000-pound animal. So now the other type. The bison jump. This method was popular with tribes of the north, where geological processes and rivers would often form steep cliffs. Before the hunt, the hunters would set up piles of rocks or assorted debris that converged in a V shape once they reached the cliff's edge. The hunt would begin when the herd was spooked by the humans, causing them to stampede. They would then be driven into the mouth of the V before being driven over the cliffside. Whilst this is called a bison jump, you can clearly see it's more of a fall. This fall would usually spell doom for the bison, but for those fortunate enough to survive, they would only have suffered possible internal injuries and severely broken bones before being finished off by the hunters at the bottom of the cliff. Yeah, not sure if that's fortunate hearing it out loud, actually. These were an incredibly effective hunting method for the Native Americans, so much so that one jump could kill upwards of 700 individuals. I mean, I like beef as much as they did, but you think you would have been fine with just the one. Now, whilst this may sound like it would have killed off the bison population in no time, this form of hunting wasn't a common event due to the time and energy it took to herd the bison, and if anything, this hunting kept the bison herds in check, after many of the large apex predators that preyed on them had gone extinct. This balance, however, was about to be shifted. In the 1500s, Europeans arrived in the Americas, bringing with them foreign diseases and illnesses that reduced the Native American population. With the natives that hunted them reduced in numbers, the bison began spreading rapidly. The population boom was noted by famous explorers Lewis and Clark, who, upon their return voyage in the 1800s, noted that the buffalo now appear in vast numbers. A herd happened to be on their way across the river. Such was the multitude of these animals that although the river, including an island over which they passed, was a 6 mile in length, the herd stretched as thick as they could swim completely from one side to the other, and the party was obliged to stop for an hour. With this spread, this meant that the remaining Native American tribes now had plentiful food fit for the taking. But the settlers brought not only disease, but something that would prove very beneficial to the hunting of the bison: horses. Having been extinct in the Americas for a while, the reintroduction of horses proved beneficial to the natives. In 1700, horses were either stolen from the Spanish or taken from wild introduced herds. And by 1750, they had become a widespread aspect of tribes, especially in the north. Now, with quick modes of transport, the bison jumps began becoming not only easier to perform, but as a result, they could be performed more regularly and on a much larger scale. Many artworks depict Native Americans driving huge numbers of these animals over the edge of cliffs, which was said to have a huge detriment to population numbers in places such as the Rocky Mountains. But bison jumps had been performed beforehand with no effect to the populations, so why would it have any effect now? Well, the fact that there were now so many of them was a major player. You see, the concept of conservation wasn't really on a lot of people's minds at this point, and natives assumed that they could get away with hunting large numbers of them with no effect to population numbers, because how could this even make a dent to these huge herds? But unfortunately, it did. Couple this with the advent of bison hide and meat trading for horses, the populations of bison began reducing rapidly. By the 1850s, just 100 years after horses became a major part of Native American society, the bison had already been extirpated from both the western and eastern regions of the Great Plains. But don't worry folks, we're not done just yet, because we can't forget about the newly arrived Europeans. By the late 1870s, the bison numbers were already showing the impact from overhunting by the Native Americans, with areas of Montana hosting herds of only a few hundred individuals. But this is where we nearly lost the bison entirely to history. Around the 1870s, bison leather and hide was in high demand for its use in both industrial belts and for the production of robes. Couple this with the ever-expanding American Railroad making transport of bison products easier, and loads of now unemployed soldiers from the recently ended Civil War looking to make some money, killing a bison at this time would have been a very profitable activity indeed. Markets were soon set up that would trade the hides of these animals eastwards in order to be shipped back to Europe. And during this period of history, famous figures arose such as William F. Cody, otherwise known as Buffalo Bill, becoming infamous for killing over 4,000 bison just to feed hungry railroad workers. So humans overhunting animals for their resources is hardly a new phenomena, but this is only one side to this extinction coin, and the other side is much more sinister. Now, I am in no way informed enough to talk about the Native American reservations, the conflicts, and the ins and outs of this, so I'm just going to talk about what it meant for the bison. Basically, the settlers wanted the natives to agree to their reservation plans, the natives refused this, so a plan was devised. One that was the brainchild of one General Sherman. Famed for his exploits in the Civil War, Sherman hatched a plan to force the natives onto the reserves. Writing to a friend, General Sheridan, he suggests that as long as the bison roamed the plains, the native people would reject the reservations. So he suggested, and I quote, that the quickest way to compel the Indians to settle down to civilized life was to send 10 regiments of soldiers to the plains, with orders to shoot buffaloes until they became too scarce to support the Redskins. Well, damn. Agreeing to this, Sheridan and Sherman would proceed to take their men on several hunting parties in order to kill the remaining herds of bison. He would even offer this opportunity to businessmen who wanted the chance to shoot the animals. William F. Cody recounts how any men who wished could use army guns. These parties were almost a nail in the coffin for the species, as they proceeded to kill herds of bison from train carriage or on horseback, removing the tongues and choice cuts from the bodies before leaving them to rot. This, as mentioned, all but spelt doom for the bison, with William Temple Hornaday's 1889 book, The Extermination of the American Bison, reporting less than 1,000 individuals across North America. Yet the species persists into the modern day, with a now relatively stable population. But how did this turnaround happen? Well, in the late 1870s, whilst the mass hunting was going on, law enforcement was proposed that tried to reduce the number of game killed, which included bison, but these were rejected due to the species' importance to the native people. It wasn't until 1894 that hunting of remaining wild bison was made illegal by then President Grover Cleveland, by which point the species had suffered a near 99% reduction in numbers. Despite this, the efforts of several individuals had managed to save a handful of private herds before this legislation was passed, which would become essential to its conservation. In 1905, the previously mentioned William Hornaday created the American Bison Society that successfully lobbied for the protection of both these private herds and the wild populations. And just 2 years later, in 1907, a herd was purchased from Montana and introduced to the Elk Island National Reserve. This population was one of the few purebred herds left, and was used to establish both a population in Elk Island and in Buffalo National Park in Alberta, Canada. From efforts like this, the bison now sits at roughly 500,000 individuals in the wild. But unfortunately, it still isn't plain sailing. Due to its reduced numbers, the species lacks high levels of genetic diversity, going through what is known as a genetic bottleneck. Plus, a lot of the private herds were owned by ranchers, who would often interbreed the bison with herds of domestic cows, reducing the species' genetic purity. This is a problem still faced in the modern conservation efforts, as the herds are often left to roam wild, which worries conservationists about possible introgression occurring with cattle. Along with this, farmers worry about the potential spread of disease from these herds, mainly the disease brucellosis, which causes infant mortality in ungulates, but affects cattle worse than bison apparently. In spite of all this, however, initiatives are being worked on that promote free-ranging herds of these animals across the prairies of North America, which balance both the need for sustainable agriculture and the land required to do it. And with that hopeful note, we come to the end of this odyssey. A stark reminder that us humans have a huge control over the natural world, both in a positive and negative way, showing us that we can not only drive a species to near extinction, but can bring it back from the brink. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, learning all about the American bison extinction and comeback. If you know anyone else interested in this topic, please send the video their way, and if you're interested in this natural world of ours, please consider subscribing or following the Instagram page in the description below. Until next time, bye bye. Now, whilst this may sound like it would have killed off the Boston?